Hey, well, what is up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 45 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined, as I always am, by the gluttonous caffeine intake to my anxious jitters, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
No, not too much, Daniel. Good to be with you as always.
Yeah,
I
except not always, because not last week, because we were off. It's a busy time now. It's the end of school for us
yeah,
here in the South, and
yeah, we got kids that have the audacity to go to the next grade and not
yeah.
stay the same age. Like
And
I
what
don't recall
selfish
giving
creatures children
I
are.
know. I don't recall giving permission for them to grow up or anything like that. This
Yeah,
is
or at least they should schedule their growing up around more convenient times for their daddies to film a podcast.
yeah,
But
yeah.
there is a lot going on because we have a backlog a bit of just kind of interesting stories. So that's kind of what I wanted us to do for this episode. Like, there's not necessarily like a big overarching deep dive question, but there's just been some interesting stories or questions or just things
Developments.
things I've been like mulling over and thinking about in kind of in relation to culture. So why don't we just jump right into it? Because I think maybe just to start, pay a little ode to we've lost a great one because Phil Robertson of Duck Dynasty fame passed away just several days ago at the age of 79. I wasn't able to find exactly what. I guess I know he had just a bunch of health issues and concerns. And I mean, he's almost 80 years old, so he lived a very full life. But I mean, he was an interesting guy, and just that show. Like, I don't think you weren't like a Duck Dynasty guy. You just had the beard, right?
Yeah, yeah. I just had the beard. But no, I mean I was aware of it at the time. I guess it was 2012, I think is when it started. And I was trying to think before we started recording if there was really, I mean, I feel like in some ways they kind of maybe paved the way a bit for a lot of the sort of Christian media content that we see today. Like, I feel like they were kind of on the front end of that. Like, I don't recall how like overtly Christian they were in the show, but I know like that's kind of been their platform is just speaking about like sharing the gospel and just speaking out about, you know, Christian values and stuff. And I feel like they were, I mean, not that no one was doing it before them, but it seems like they were kind of on the front end of this sort of wave of, now we're getting articles like, faith-based films have gone mainstream and all that kind of stuff. I feel like they were kind of on the cusp of some of that.
Or at least like at a level that hadn't really been like. Because I mean, that
Yeah.
show was just massive. I think it's kind of funny. Like, in some ways, I feel like it didn't have. I mean, I think it's back now. They've revived it, but it didn't seem to have like this cultural staying power necessarily. Like I kind of forgot about the show, but like in its
Yeah.
heyday, like it was like one of the biggest things on TV.
Oh,
Like it,
yeah.
um, like I feel like it's, and maybe there were like before our time, like some older shows that maybe had some crossover appeal, but I feel like a show kind of made by Christians or like, featuring Christians with the faith elements kind of in there to reach like that level of mainstream
Yeah.
success and like recognizability and like even like his death was covered in Hollywood Reporter, like all the
Yeah.
major um but yeah, like I don't know if and hey, if you're listening to this, maybe leave us a comment if there's some we missed, but like it's hard to think of anyone that had that big of a breakout. And it seems like they've all like they've been very faithful to sort of use that
Yeah.
platform. Like a lot of them have branched off to do speaking and writing, and I haven't necessarily followed their all their stuff to know
Yeah.
how legitimate, but it seems like they've sort of stayed on the straight and narrow. So I don't
Yeah.
know if like if it's going to be covered in the show or whatnot. But I thought we would just at least mention that that we have lost him.
Well,
But kind of
he
another,
was certainly iconic, and so I think that if nothing else, the beard was epic and
yeah.
like
If you're gonna leave a legacy, leave one
yeah,
of faith. But if you're already leaving a legacy of faith, leave it of
may it be of whiskers.
epic, ZZ Top esque beards. Kind of another thing that it's just something I've been thinking about. We weren't able to talk about it last week because we didn't do a podcast last week. But kind of several in like the faith-based world and burly men kind of world. Um, a movie came out last week, The Last Rodeo, which you can, I'm sure if you haven't already, if for some reason you just got caught up and haven't read my full review, insightful review, I've heard, make sure to go check that out on the Collision or on our YouTube page. Again, Angel Studios movie, bull riding, which I know Sam knows, like that's totally my scene. Like I'm,
Oh yeah.
like if I'm not behind the desk in a podcast, you can probably find me at a rodeo.
Yeah.
That's the sort of my, that's my
That's
jam.
your
Those are my
jam.
people. Uh, you
Hmm.
know, I relate kindred spirit. So I know nothing about bull riding, but it's a movie that was getting a lot of buzz. And again, I don't want to spoil the punchline of my review, but wasn't crazy about the movie. I don't think I haven't seen. I think it did okay, maybe ish at the box office, but I didn't necessarily think it was a great movie. But I feel like there's some interesting like kind of conversations or things like around the movie that almost interest me more than like the actual movie. And kind of the first one of those is just kind of the idea and like the question of just like masculinity, because this is like I mean, as you would expect in a movie like this, like this is a movie, not that girls and don't can't like rodeos and stuff, but like this is a very like masculine heavy, you have kind of gruff bull riders and they're shirtless and they're riding bulls and knocking back drinks and spouting profanity, and it's just like very much aimed at kind of men, at least that's the way I took it, which has not always been the case. I know you're a
Yeah.
big faith-based film, especially going back to the earlier days of the genre, and so you would know a lot of these stuff, but like traditionally the films have been pretty heavily like aimed at women. Like
Yeah.
I didn't pull the numbers, but like I know like statistically the primary audience for faith-based entertainment, like at least, so far has been like middle-aged women.
Yeah.
It's kind of the I know I was in like a meeting once like about a perspective film that they were trying to work on things, and like that comes up in the creation. Like there's things that ideas that were being thrown around, and I think they sort of had to be filtered through like through the question of like will this like detract middle-aged church ladies from going to see this, because if it does, then that's our bread and butter. We can't afford to. So like the
Right.
movie itself was being shaped to make sure that um and like obviously this Last Rodeo doesn't do that, and it seems like there's been a trend, like even somewhat like the House of David show. Like there's still some romance and things that would appeal to a wider audience, but a bit more like masculine focused. It just seems like faith-based film. There's been sort of like a change where some of the emphasis seems to be aiming more like towards trying to appeal to men as opposed to trying to appeal to women. And kind of the backdrop that I think is interesting for that, and then we can kind of get into it a little bit, is just that kind of in some ways that reflects just the trends of the wider culture. Because for so long, we've heard the narrative of America, or like the world becoming less religious, like the fastest growing demographic or like religious orientation for the last decade or more was like this, those called like the nuns, like those that don't associate with any, they might be spiritual, but they don't associate with like any major religion.
Right.
And it seems like that's just been steadily growing for decades, except like in the last couple of years, like that's leveled off and like even gone like that. It seems like that sort of growth hit the max, and like there's actually been a resurgence in the last couple of years, according to like surveys and all the data, like of particularly Gen Z, like actually returning to church, and like you know like a resurgence of just interest in religious activity, and like kind of within that resurgence, and the younger generation, Gen Z, is that it's being led primarily by men. Like the like Gen Z men are, like, I was looking up some studies even just today, like USA Today had an article, some data saying like Gen Z men are more likely to attend than women, or like the New York Times had some data saying that like of those that are staying in church as opposed to leaving, like young men are more staying in church as opposed to like many young women who are leaving the church, being sort of distancing themselves from religion, which was sort of in the back of my mind with like this Last Rodeo movie of just, I feel like for so long, like there's sort of been this mindset of like, the women are the one that, they're dragging their husbands to church and, they're don't want, dragging them away from the big football game. And kind of, you got to target women because that's sort of the ones, the movers and shakers that are going to bring people to church. So a lot of the entertainment and stuff is aimed at women, where like now, like it seems like, well, actually men are more likely, at least of a certain like age demographic, that's more the ones that are going to be, prime, fertile soil to kind of get back into religion. And I just sort of wonder, like, obviously we don't have enough of sample size maybe to make any like conclusions, but with things like the Last Rodeo or some other sort of shifts towards kind of aiming, like I just wonder like how much sort of these cultural shifts are gonna like change sort of the objectives of like the church, but also of like the entertainment world. And what do you think of some of this? Like, do you think, like just of these trends and like, are we going to see like a shift emphasis in the way that like these movies are made based on some of these demographics?
Yeah, I mean, I would think there is, and I mean, it seems like they're already making some of those shifts, by seeing movies of the faith-based genre that are more heavily focused on men, or at least men as the audience. And I think even just like the one, what was the one about the sex trafficking?
Oh, Sound of Freedom.
Sound of Freedom. Yeah, so movies like that, I feel like probably Bonhoeffer as well. Last Rodeo. There was the apocalyptic one that had, it was kind of like the weird, like it's gonna be a TV show, but they like,
Oh yeah,
there was like a movie like
Homestead.
Homestead. Yeah,
Getting those
yeah.
videos.
So I mean, but I think that all kind of goes along with, I think sort of the reactionary narrative to what Hollywood has been doing for the past 20 years, which is like, men are evil and women need to rule the world. I mean, obviously that's like grossly simplistic, but it's like that's sort of been the push, I think, over the last, I don't know, 10 to 20 years, is it's like, toxic masculinity is, that's bad. And, sort of assumed in that is like, because you're a man, you need to prove that you're not bad rather than just assume you're a person and we'll judge you based on that. And so I think it makes sense if there is a shift to the church, where the church is very much, at least historically, has been very much like, no, men have a role to play in the church and in the home, and God has given men, you know, assignments, to not only be a man, but also to be, a father, a husband. It's very like, the church is obviously very pro men, for better or worse. That's a whole nother discussion maybe, but I could see how, you have these two competing ideologies about, manhood and masculinity. And I think it makes sense that there's more men now gravitating towards the place where they find acceptance. And so I don't like, I have no data or studies to back that up necessarily, but I'm not surprised at all that we're seeing this shift, because it's like, well, if this segment of society is saying, men are evil and, they need to all go away, and then you have Christians over here saying, no, like we're all created in the image of God, men are welcome here. Well, then, yeah, there's going to be a shift, I think.
Yeah, because that is the question. Sort of like why, and like I think with any of these big trends and shifts, like the tendency is to want to like pin it down to like causation of like it
Yeah.
is this because of this one issue. If we just, which like the reality is like there's tons of factors and there's tons of different things that are all intertwined, and you don't know how much of influence. But I think what you were saying to me, that is like, not the sole reason, but like a big reason is
Yeah,
kind of just the idea of like narratives. Like I think, for so long, like the wider culture, it's sort of like it's a man's world, and you know, and then like the church has this narrative of like, well, but like Jesus, like in his own man's world, male dominated world, like sought out women, and women had a place in the church, and like it was very much like, hey, the culture doesn't really, you know, accept you, but like the church does. So like women, are flocking to church, and like that's attractive. And like you almost have like the inverse now, like
yeah,
it's male, toxic masculinity is bad, and like all masculinity is toxic. It's kind of the
yeah,
jest of, and you have sort of like the Harry Styles, like the like kind of the males that are like elevated as like the icons of sort of the wider culture are the ones that very much like deconstruct and like distance themselves from sort of traditional masculinity, and it's very much like a more feminine, getting in touch with our feminine side, and dressing in women's clothing and stuff, and that like you sort of see the appeal of like, oh well, the church also, for as good as it is, as much as Jesus included women, like the church, I think, often in unhealthy ways, has been very like male led, and
yeah,
there's something appealing to that. So like you do sort of have this like pendulum, and I don't know, like I think for me, I think it's good to have men go back to the church. I think some of the reasons men may be doing that aren't necessarily healthy. Of while the church says men should have dominion over the world and over women, and it's
yeah,
there is sort of that appeal, but you do kind of see just the power of some of these narratives, and just sort of the shifting of like the different things that kind of resonate, like, and I think that's part of why women are leaving the church in some ways, is because it's sort of appealing to men and sort of painting that narrative. Now you have the opposite, where the church now isn't inclusive to women, but the culture is very much women will inherit the earth, and the force is female, and all these things,
yeah,
like, so it's more appealing for them to be, again, like you said, that's like grossly simplistic, um but like that definitely is a factor, and I do think like as the church and as Christians, like that is an important, as the demographics change, and like I do think that there is a sense that we sort of need to keep up with that, and be aware of some of these shifts. And I think I am curious at how much more like the entertainment world is faith-based wise, like it's going to start leaning into sort of whether it's good or bad, like into that like masculine stories. Because it's interesting, like the one you mentioned, the Homestead, the Angel Studios like movie slash show, was sort of like the awkward middle ground of that. Like all the aesthetics are these like big dudes with big guns, and it's like there's nukes going off, and these big guys that are gonna be fighting, and like it's like, oh, like this is it seemed to me like the start of this trend, and I was intrigued by it. But then like you watch it, and like all the males are just, at least in the one I only watched like the first two episodes. I didn't follow if they've changed it, but like all the dudes are just a bunch of idiots. Like they're just these like meatheads that want to go fight, and they all have no weak faith, and like all of their wives or girlfriends are like these like steadfast pillars of faith, and like they're just constantly lecturing their husbands about what to do, and to do the right thing and to show compassion, like, and it's sort of like it's like the Christian entertainment world like wanted to appeal to men because that's sort of the way things are going, but it still sort of defaulted to the default of like it's very emotional, and it's very women explaining to men that they need to step up and have faith like they do, and not just be a big meathead. And I just remember thinking that's sort of like a like it shows some of the growing pains perhaps of
yeah,
like how to do that. um Another aspect of the movie that I thought I would mention, because this is somewhat of a soapbox for me, like and that's just like profanity in films that don't need to have profanity. Uh, because like to be clear, like I'm not, in some ways, like I'm more open to profanity in entertainment than a lot of Christians are. Like, so I'm not necessarily just like a, whatever, like a stick in the mud. Like, you
yeah,
know, if you're watching, what if you're watching Netflix with Jesus and you heard that swear word, like, what would you do? Like, what would Jesus do? Kind of stuff. Like, but like because I think there are films that it makes sense. Like, not that it's necessarily always necessary, but I get it and whatever. Like I can hear that's this the thing that's this the world to me. Like people speak that
Yeah.
way. Um, but where it doesn't make sense is two places. One is children's movies, which even the Lilo and Stitch remake had a profanity in it, and I just cannot think of why. Hey, one profanity is not the end of the world, but like who was sitting in like the boardroom and writing the script and said, you know what this film needs? This Lilo and Stitch movie? I swear. Like I don't get it. But I'll set that aside and step on my other soapbox. And that's just like faith-based films. Like because there's been that's sort of become the trend. I guess someone that reviews all these films, like almost all of them have it now. Like especially the Angel Studios ones, which I've liked a lot of most of the Angel Studios movies. Um, and I don't think they've always been like super egregious profanity, and it's usually just a couple minor ones scattered throughout. But it just seems like I guess the question of like, do we need that? Like, is
Yeah.
it are we honestly doing it to tell authentic stories, or like is it how it feels comes across to me at least is sort of like the like you know like it's like the boomer showing up at the skate park with like bleach spiked hair, and it's sort of like, see, like I'm cool, I'm one of the kids. Like to me the profanity has almost become a way to like a gimmick of like, see, like
Yeah.
this isn't your grandfather's faith-based film. Like we're gritty and edgy and we have swear words in it. And like this is a real film because we speak like real films. And like, I don't know. I just don't know who's buying that. Like because this film, like it doesn't have, there's not like an F word, but there's like 15 profanities. Like, and I guess, I don't know, like in one sense, like a rodeo, like I'm sure there's profanity spoken at rodeos.
Probably.
Like I don't think it's like not authentic to the thing, but it's just
Yeah.
like is it,
If I get ejected from the back of a bull, there might be profanities. Yeah.
yeah, I mean like I don't I think Jesus understands that.
Yeah.
But it's just sort of like is it necessary though to communicate that through profanity, or has it become sort of like a just a gimmick of like trying to prove, and like I just don't know who's buying that, like because like the rest of the Last Rodeo is sort of that traditional like kind of softer faith-based, like like you have the character sort of pulling out his Bible all of a sudden, like reading a verse, and like it sort of has some of those like more hokey, like this is an evangelistic faith-based film, but then you have a bit of profanity in there. Like I don't know, do I just need to loosen up and just speak the language of the world and accept it, or like is is
No.
there any like where do you stand on the
Yeah. No. I mean, I remember there was a faith-based film a couple of years ago about like a pilot. I think it was like based on a true story, and it was on
is it
Amazon.
on a wing and a
On a
prayer?
Wing and a Prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's why I'm glad you're here, Daniel, because
See, I'm like an encyclopedia of
a
film
faith-based
knowledge.
film. Yeah. Um, and I remember watching because I watched that one, and I remember thinking because there's a couple of swear words in there that are like just don't make any sense, like in the script. And I just remember thinking like this seems like a shorthand to try and be like, see, you know, I always think of that uh Steve Buscemi.
I
Is
knew
it
I knew you were going
yeah.
there.
That meme of him like he's got a backwards hat and a skateboard and he walks up and he's like, "What's happening, fellow kids?" You know, and it's just like that's the vibe I think that sort of unnecessary swearing in like a faith-based film. That's what it's always done for me is like, yeah, I mean, okay, it makes sense, maybe given the context, but then the way it's like executed at least, or I don't know, it just seems kind of a shorthand for, hey, we're cool, we're not, this isn't your grandma's uh Christian movie, like
Do you know the crazy thing too is like that's entirely what it was for that film. Like through kind of connections and stuff, like heard from the creators of that film
of
of
the
On a Wing and a Prayer,
oh, okay.
like sharing about the film like before it came out, and like almost bragging, like, this it has profanity, like kind of like that was sort of their shorthand to like see like it's an edgy, this is sort of a mainstream, it's on Amazon, and it's
Like
like
even if you're not Christian, you could watch
yeah,
it and you'll
like
be,
yeah,
you'll like it because we
as though
sing it
people in the
swear.
audience are going to be like, okay, like I know half this film has been characters praying and sappy, stuff, but like he said, the D word once or twice, like maybe this is just a normal film. Like I just feel like the mainstream audience is not taking it the same way. I think that Christians, that are doing that are
The
intending.
way the Christian marketers who are kind of behind some of these films, at least I always blame it all on the marketers, but um, yeah, they're thinking of this like, oh yeah, this is gonna hit hard, and then it's like, yeah, but that like I think they're just not seeing it in total context. It's like they sort of see it in isolation of like, yeah, this character, but then you step back and you say, well, but the whole thing just kind of feels a little bit hokey when you just try and season it with vulgarities, and
And
it's
I,
like,
I feel
is
like
that
I feel like somewhat where that comes from is because Christians have been so focused on like bad content in movies is like, these sort of gritty mainstream films and they have this content that like I think we sort of mistake like what makes a film sort of gritty and raw is not just that it has a few minor profanities scattered in. Like
yeah,
there's more to the storytelling that you can't just like slap the profanity into a non-gritty, soft, non-challenging type film
right,
and expect that this is, you have Scorsese, Killers of the Flower Moon, and you have, On a Wing and a Prayer, and they both have profanity, so they're both gritty. And it's like, no, like there's, you know, like the profanity and stuff almost comes out of the more gritty focus in the
yeah.
storytelling, and like I don't know. So
I
that's
guess
just
it
sort
all
of like
just comes down to like bad script writing. I guess it's sort of the like how it all sort of gets fleshed out is that you know you don't have a real gritty story, but you want to make it sort of edgy, so just slap some curse words in here and call it a day. And it's like it just ignores the rest of the context of the movie and like the actual storytelling of the movie. At least that's what I don't know. That's what kind of comes
yeah,
across
it's like
as.
failing to commit. Like it's like you
Yeah,
want a gritty story, but audiences and Christian audiences maybe aren't ready for it, or
yeah,
you don't have like the courage to just sort of go that far, or the people funding it don't want you to. So it's
right,
like
right.
what can we sort of shorthand in and hope and it is I don't know. So it doesn't like it didn't like ruin the movie for me. I think the movie I didn't like for other reasons beyond that. And like I'm not one to get like super offended. I get mad about the kids ones, but like the faith-based ones, like I don't know. I just for
Yeah,
me it's more of a cringe of just like because it usually reflects a movie that like just doesn't quite get what makes
yeah,
other movies that they're trying to mimic kind of work. Kind of another thing I thought we speaking of things that companies in Hollywood uh, not getting what works and what connects with audiences, except for when they do, is Disney. So kind of releasing also since the last time we recorded a podcast is Lilo and Stitch, the live action remake. Disney. There's unfortunately there still is Disney animated films that have not received the remake treatment. Like we're in the Lilo and Stitch bottom of the barrel. We've gone through most of the major princesses, and
yeah,
we've done Lion King and prequels to Lion King, and I can't really think of any like we're in like this B C tier. There
yeah.
can't be that many more to be subjected to this.
Has Emperor's New Groove? When is that slated? Is there going to be a live action?
I mean, I feel like at that point we riot. Uh, if some things are sacred. I know we haven't done like Tangled. That seems
Yeah,
like probably the next like big one that hasn't.
Frozen,
Princess and the Frog we haven't done. Frozen.
Frozen.
I don't know why they haven't. I think they are doing one, aren't they? I can't
Probably.
imagine that they're not.
It's probably too soon though, right?
I mean,
Like
Moana is
Frozen.
getting one.
Oh, that's true.
Moana is newer than. I think Moana's came after Frozen.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it
You're the one
did.
with the young daughters. You should know
Yeah, I
that.
know. Well, I mean, that all runs together for me.
Yeah.
It's
Um,
Moana's. Well, they have been watching because they saw that um the new Lilo and Stitch came out. We've been watching the original.
which
Uh,
is great. I had never seen Lilo and Stitch um, until the day I saw, like the morning before I went and saw the remake, I
oh,
watched
had
the
you not ever
cartoon.
seen
Like
it
I don't
before?
know why I just never, it kind of fell in that weird time. Then like I didn't have girls, and then not that it's necessarily just for girls, but like my boys never really got into the Disney movies as much. Like I
Yeah,
kind of skipped over some of that, and it's great. Like the
yeah,
movie's really good. I know like it's super popular. It's just it's not really like a B tier as far as quality. It's just not one of the iconic. Like it's
yeah.
one of the later animated films.
Well, something
Um,
I wanted to ask you about that before we get into it, but I mentioned I noticed that in your review you didn't mention anything about the soundtrack, and we were wondering if the soundtrack from the original, which is like a bunch of great Elvis songs, did that carry over into
it did
the?
not carry over.
See
No,
that
there's
that's
like
a
no music. There's at the very
really,
the yeah like I think part of it is like it's like it suffers from the realism thing of like Stitch doesn't dress up as Elvis and play guitar, and I feel like maybe that just is too cartoonish to like
yeah, but
translate.
it's like
Like
why
the
like
closing credits, there's
I
like
did.
some rock kind of like classic stuff that played, and I think you see Elvis. Like I think maybe there's pictures of. I think they pay homage to that aspect of it, but there's no other music.
That's to me that's a huge miss because when we were watching it the other day, like the girls were watching it, and I was like in the kitchen or whatever, but my wife and I were both like, this has got like such a great soundtrack. It's like it's all like Elvis hits, and it's
Yeah,
like
none of
this
like
is really good.
they have some of the like the Hawaiian stuff, like the intro. I think the music might be the
Yeah,
very same, and like the Lilo and her sister, I kind of sing some like hula songs, but they don't have that like high energy. Unless I'm just forgetting some of
yeah,
that
that's
because I
really
wasn't
too
really close.
bad. I don't
But
think I'll see it now.
yeah, hey, if it doesn't have the king, I don't want
Yeah,
anything to do with it. But apparently, if you don't go see it, Disney won't necessarily notice because
yeah.
a lot of other people are in
I'll,
fact going to see it.
I'll
So
be
this
one of the
movie,
only few
so
who
this
don't.
like, because I mean, like these movies have been, I mean, I think for good reason, doing terrible. Like they keep making them almost out of like, I don't know, like obligation. Like,
I don't.
but like,
Yeah, it's like the train is moving, so I guess we have to keep. We can't
yeah,
stop
and
it
if we don't
now.
remake our old movies, then we've got to come up with new ones. And like, I don't know if
That's too
anyone wants to do
hard.
that. Like,
Yeah,
that seems like it's a little harder than just remaking them. So like Snow White and some of these movies have just done absolutely atrocious at the movie theater. But Lilo and Stitch has broken the trend because this movie is massive hit. I think surprisingly so. So like after its opening weekend, worldwide gross was $361.2 million. So that's just after like its opening, couple days weekend,
yeah,
which like in to like compare and contrast, Snow White, the live action not so much hit, made 205.1 million in its entire theatrical run, which was about 2 months and probably about 2 months longer than anyone wanted. So like this movie is made like is by now it's made, I'm sure it's made about double uh, of what Snow White made in its whole run in a couple in less than a week. It's on track. It's probably going to cross $1 billion unless it just like totally tanks after the first weekend. But it seems like the word of mouth too is like, I don't know. Like for me, if to spoil my own review, if you haven't seen that, is like it's fine. Like it doesn't like offend me at how bad it is. Like it's not good, but like no one I didn't expect it to be good. Like, but like it's
yeah,
perfectly watchable. Like I enjoyed it. I will never watch it again, but I don't like hate myself having wasted those 2 hours of my life on
yeah,
it. So, but it's interesting because it does raise the question, at least for someone like me, of like you have two Disney releases released in the same calendar year. One's a massive hit, one's a gigantic bomb. And again, not I think that we can have the same issues as before of like, you know, like the causation conversation of like it, Snow White failed because of this one thing, and this movie succeeded because it didn't do that one thing. Like it, it's always more complicated than that. Like
yeah,
there's other factors, and like it's not always cultural narrative. Like sometimes it's just, well, this movie was better than this one. or like, this movie
Yeah.
appeals more to like Lilo and Stitch has a cute alien in the front, and that appeals to more people, kids that see the trailers. Hey, I want to see that movie. It's funny, as opposed to Snow White, which more appeals to parents who were turned off by other reasons. Like, so I guess it's not a simple conversation. Um, but it does raise the question though of like, why is it that one film can be such a hit? And I've kind of seen already, like, there's been a bunch of like hot takes online of like, Disney learns its lesson after Snow White bomb, which like that's just not how films work. Like
Yeah.
like this film was not made, they didn't start to film and edit this movie since Snow White finished. Like this movie's been in the works for years. Like,
Yeah.
Hollywood takes a lot longer to like course correct. The question's more like, will they learn the lesson or what they think is the lesson, if there is a lesson, from the success of Lilo and Stitch rather than as opposed to like the failure of Snow White. Um, but like, so you haven't seen either one of these movies, uh, so you can't necessarily speak to that aspect of it. Um, but like, as someone that had to sit through these out of work obligation, like I do think there is something to be said about just the mentality of approaching these films. Like, because Lilo and Stitch is a fairly faithful, like they changed some details and stuff. Like the third act is very different, and weird. The music is not in it. Like there's changes, and some of them are fine, some of them are dumb. But at least to me, and I'm not a long time nostalgic Lilo and Stitch fan, but there are changes that like, hey, you're adapting to live action. It's a different, not medium, but like a different approach. Like,
It's a different genre. I
yeah,
mean,
like not everything translates. Like you can't
yeah.
do things that work in animation don't work in, and vice versa. And like, so like, and you have more time and you can expand things. And it's like, I took it more like that as opposed to like Snow White, which is like, hey, we're gonna remake this movie, but the original actually is like awful and terrible, and no one should watch it, and it's so outdated, and so we're gonna like tear it down, deconstruct it, and like build it up in our own image as a totally different thing. And it's turns out that like audiences don't necessarily want that. They don't necessarily want you to deconstruct the film that you're remaking, But like,
Yeah.
what do you think? Like, because again, you haven't seen the movies, but you followed I mean, you heard about Snow White at least,
Yeah.
which I think in itself says something that like even people that haven't seen the movie have heard the talent and the directors and all the conversation because there was so
Yeah.
much talk about the Snow White thing. But what are some
Yeah.
of your sort
Yeah.
of initial reactions to that?
No, I think faithfulness to the source material is rewarded. Like maybe that's just the lesson. If you're gonna go to the trouble of remaking movies, um, and obviously Disney is really keen to do that. Like that seems to be the only thing they want to do. Um, then I think you have to take serious the source material. And like yes, are there things that did not age well in Snow White? Yeah, probably. Um, it was made almost 100 years ago or something, like a long time ago. So it's like, yeah, have modern sensibilities, shifted since then? Yeah, probably. But does that mean you have to deconstruct it and then reconstruct it on some flimsy, modernist, postmodern sensibilities? No. And I think hopefully that's the lesson that's learned here is that, you know, there are beloved films for a reason. And I think just totally deconstructing it and just putting your own take on it, like be prepared to just sort of face the music if you do that, especially if you do that and you don't do it well. Which I mean, I think you can make the case in some instances where you can just totally, do a deconstructionist version of something. And okay, it has something to say and it's entertaining and interesting and it's not what you expected and it was done well, fine. But so far, Disney has not done that well. And I think that's sort of the issue that people have is it's like you're making all of these weird changes and it just does not make sense for people. And so it's like, well, so what are you trying to do? And then like nobody wants to be lectured either,
Well, I
and
think
so
that's the thing. Like for me, because like for anyone that accuses me of just being negative towards movies all the time, like I actually kind of liked Snow White. Like I was one of the like six people in America that didn't just hate this movie. Like I didn't
Yeah.
think it was good. Like it's not a good movie. I will never watch it again. Um, but I didn't think it was terrible. Like, the changes,
Right.
some of them were fine. I get it. Some of them were bad. Like, the movies overall is just sort of, it's just kind of a dumb movie. But I was kind of curious, like, how would the movie have been received in like a pre-internet world? Like, because I feel like you were
Yeah.
saying, the lectured two part, like in some ways, like the movie, you can definitely get sort of the modern feminist approach in it. Like, no longer the damsel waiting for the prince. Like she's like, rising up her people to rebel. Like she's, like a war leader almost. Like you kind of get like some of that, some of the changes, but like I don't necessarily find the movie preaching. But like the conversation around the movie is
Yeah.
definitely preaching. Like, a lot of the stuff that people were reacting to, like it seemed like 'cause even the people what people are most mad about, it seems from like my own anecdotal experience, is Rachel Zegler, like the lead actress, and like her, like she's just a hot button, divisive person, anyways. Largely because she's young and she speaks her mind and she doesn't always think through she doesn't have the, or at least she didn't have the PR training yet, the media to know what not to say. But like even in like the comments and things and conversation like toward from my reviews, like it seems that what people are really reacting to is even less the movie as it is her. Like,
Yeah.
like sort of like because people even got sort of almost got after me in my review for not spending enough time like commenting on like her pre-release comments, and it's like, well, like I'm reviewing the movie, like I'm not reviewing the press
Yeah.
tour. Like I don't, if she can say anything she wants, that she always pictured Snow White as a lesbian. Like, well, like if the movie itself doesn't tell me that, then like I'm not gonna, I don't care what she's saying. Like I'm going by what's in the
Yeah.
movie, which has kind of always been my approach. So I am curious, like, because I feel like there's so much which Lilo and Stitch didn't have. Like at least I didn't experience. Like maybe
Yeah.
it's because the main actress in it's like 9 years old, so she's she's not on the press tours doing all these like interviews and stuff. But like it's just sort of that preaching. Like I think it's the not that like things like old Disney movies should be like treated like sacred gospel and like
Yeah.
how dare you you change the detail in Snow White. Like it's a fairy tale. Like Snow White itself, the Disney is a remake of the more grim fairy. Like, that's just sort of the nature of fairy tales and stuff. So like, I don't really have a problem with that. I feel like what people are tired of is sort of the arrogance of just treating these beloved things as merely their platform to preach their own message, like,
Yeah.
and to tell people why, hey, you might like this movie we're making, but you shouldn't. And if you do, you're kind of bad because it's
Yeah.
just filled with a bunch of, chauvinistic tendencies and all these things. And like, we're gonna give you not what you want, like what you need, and you just don't know it yet. Like, I feel like
Right.
that's the thing that where it's like people are just tired of kind of Hollywood, if you want to use Hollywood as like in the general of just sort of using these films and these beloved properties and stuff as just sort of their mouthpiece to lecture and like
Yeah. And I think that ties into sort of our first conversation about sort of masculinity in the church, because like you can see like you take a figure like Rachel Ziegler and just all the preachiness and how bad men are, and sort of like no wonder you have men now sort of flocking to the church where they are accepted. And so I think that's sort of a great example of maybe the reaction that a lot of men are having. Again, I'm sure there was no one man who watched an interview with her and was like, "Oh, that's it. I'm going to be a Christian now." Like, but you just see if you're just constantly bombarded with these narratives of like toxic masculinity, and the thing that you grew up liking, yeah, well, that's bad, and you're bad because you liked it. And so it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna go someplace where they're not saying that. And so, and again, like, not to say you should never critique the things you liked as a kid, or like you can look at some old cartoons and like some of them were pretty terrible and like would definitely not get made today. And I think everybody would agree that some of them should not have been made. But it's like, okay, well, what can you learn from that? And and not just be this like, okay, we're gonna take this beloved property and just invert the whole thing, or at least say that's what we're doing. And again, I think the other issue is that, like, unfortunately, the media surrounding a release of a film kind of becomes a stand-in for whatever the film is. And so when you see like the actors or directors giving commentary on the movie they want to release, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what the movie's saying or is even in the movie. And so, if you want to be cynical, you could say, well, in some ways she maybe was doing her job because it got people talking about the movie. Obviously, not enough people went to see the movie. Um, but it's like, it's too bad, I think, that so much of like the pre-release press stuff kind of gets conflated into like that's what the movie is.
Yeah, and I
And
always
I think that's what people probably responded to in your review was like, well, you're reviewing the movie, not the press junket leading up to the movie, and
yeah,
I
like I
say,
don't feel like I need to like out of some principle bash a movie because one of these actresses in it said some things 6 months earlier in an interview. And like I always cut people like in one sense people should be accountable for what they say. I get that.
yeah,
But I always cut some of these people slack on, not that what I think what Rachel Zegler was saying in the interviews, like I get why people didn't like that. Like I don't think it's good what she said. I think it did cost the movie, but as someone that not at that level of like a Hollywood star, but like has like written some books and had to do some like press type things and interviews and lined up back to back. Like these people are giving so many of these interviews and like they're saying so many things off the cuff, all day, same question that like I don't know, like they say one thing and at the end of like their fifth interview of the day and someone takes that one clip out of the context and slaps it everywhere and it goes around the media and becomes viral and like that colors the whole movie and like
yeah.
I don't know. I feel like in some ways the enjoyment of film would be better if we just sort of logged off the internet and just went into the movie without any kind of preconceived notion of the narratives or what we're supposed to feel to align. But kind of in closing, I do think it does, like you were saying. I think this conversation just does sort of show. I think even going back, like you were saying, to the masculinity and some of that, like just that relationship, like the synergy between sort of, you know, entertainment and like wider cultural trends of, like, 'cause so much of it is narrative. Like we're really reacting to narratives, like the narrative
Yeah,
within the church, the narrative within the culture, the way we're, and like films in some ways like reflect the narrative. Like they kind of capitalize the culture's going this way, so we're gonna lean into that because we want people. But I think it also shapes it, like this is, you know, people see the church as this because that's how it's portrayed in movies and stuff. Or people see men, like this because that's how Hollywood's portraying it, or romance and some of that kind of stuff. So you do like, which is why I think it's important to just be aware of entertainment and movies and like the deeper levels of, because like it is shaping and reflecting and like reinforcing these narratives that then kind of that becomes what we almost react to more
yeah,
than the real thing. Like we have the church just isn't this, like, well, like that's just a very broad, like there's many churches and there's many experiences, but like what we're saying is like there's a narrative about the church and we don't like that narrative, or about masculinity or whatever. But one thing I know that there is no polarized opinions because it's a narrative that I know, just injected into me every week, every second week at least, in an IV. And that is the final segment of this podcast, which is things we like that you should like too. Well, Samuel, it's gonna be hard to. I know you've had 2 weeks, I think, or something, but like 2 weeks ago, I shared about German power metal, kind of stadium rock power metal, and like that's, I mean, bar set high. So, but I
yeah.
will, I will cede the floor and let you share something surely less interesting than that. So, what do you like
Well,
this week?
Dane, I'll take a cue from you and cross the Atlantic, cross the pond, as it were, and share something that is near and dear to my heart. And I'm sure I've shared this before, but it just so happens that a new season of, I think, what is considered the pinnacle of television, and that is Clarkson Farms. And this is with Jeremy Clarkson, the petrol head from Top Gear fame, who's been a presenter on the BBC for decades at this point. He has a farm in Oxford area, like in England, and it's a riot. It's loads of fun. It's just hilarious, and also interesting to just see what like farmers go through. Like it is just kind of funny because it's like, is he really a farmer? Because he's like just this like famous rich person who's like, is he just kind of role playing as a farmer? But I think he is actually doing quite a lot of stuff, and he's actually quite bad at a lot of it, which makes for great television. But also I think just shows how difficult it is to like grow food out at a large scale. And so and I know it's done a lot of good, especially for farmers like in the UK. And you see just like anytime that I get frustrated with our government, when it comes to just like, what you do with your property or just laws and regulation, like it is nothing compared to like the amount of restraints and conditions placed on the citizens of Britain. And so it's always fun to watch. And so it's on Amazon Prime. You can watch all the available seasons now, but Clarkson Farm.
Yeah, well, I mean, all those descriptors like fun to watch, a riot, interesting. Like, I mean, I believe I can see why those would describe a British farming show. Like,
Yeah.
like is it like does like each
Riveting.
episode end with like a cliffhanger? Like, is it
Sometimes.
bingeable or is it more you watch
Oh,
and
it's
leave?
bingeable. It's like, will they find a derelict pub that they can renovate, in time for, the August bank holiday that they want to open for? Tune in next week.
Have
So,
you ever like do they have like Jackson Farm or whatever his name is like conventions? Like, is there a big fandom for this that you're a part of, or is
well, I'm not a part of any official fandom, but it is like one of the most popular shows on Amazon Prime. Like,
is it
it,
actually?
oh yeah, like it definitely is. Like it's up there with like it's I don't know. I'd have to look at the rankings, but I probably should have done that before this, but it's definitely high.
Which I mean, the lesson to take away from that is like if you need more fuel for the fire of the argument that like streaming and stuff just isn't producing quality content, is if that's like the pinnacle of what we're getting from Amazon.
Oh yeah. It's
One of these days,
you can do no better is the problem. It's like
yeah, maybe we just peaked. So
it
one of
is.
these days, I will watch one of your farming shows. Um, uh, that day may not be, within the next 5 or 6 years, but one of these days,
Yeah,
I need
eventually.
to,
When
uh,
you retire.
yeah, when I have time, when I'm that bored and with nothing to do, I need to just plug it in. Well, actually, I'm going to be home alone. My wife and kids are leaving for a week and a half coming up. Like, so I'm going to have all this time. And what better way then to sort of batch third up than maybe binge through a season?
Yeah,
So stay tuned. Maybe we'll have the Collision official review on
we should. We totally should.
this. But whether we do that or not, we will be hopefully back next Thursday and every Thursday when we can, for more conversations on faith and pop culture. Always a lot going on. I know the summer, like there's a lot of big movies coming up. I'm seeing Karate Kid Legends coming up tomorrow, and some big Pixar movies, and just there's going to be a lot of stuff to get into. And there's some other big cultural stories that we haven't been able to get to yet. So there should be plenty of us to get in, to dive into beyond just farming TV. So we hope we will see you then. Until then, stay safe. Thanks for listening. We'll see you then.